Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. I am Abby Robbins, and I'm here with
Kimberly Culbertson.
And today we're going to be talking about type 1.
Type 1. Woo woo.
I like that your response to every type is woo.
So every type is great.
Yeah.
And every type is terrible. That's the joy of the Enneagram. Mm-hmm. That's how you know when someone's new to the Enneagram. They're like, is that a bad one? Like, no, they're all bad. And they're all wonderful.
They're all bad.
But I'm a 7, so everything's wonderful first.
There you go. Okay. I'm an 8, so I do tend to make things bad first. But
it's a good podcast.
Yeah, we're
just
doing
lean
it.
In.
So type 1, for those of you who haven't caught the last couple episodes with type 8 and type 9, we're going through and we're talking about each type in terms of their dominant center of intelligence, their repressed center of intelligence, or their stance, and their conflict resolution style. And we're kind of talking about what those are for each type and how they show up. We've gone through 8 and we've gone through 9. And I really I like this kind of 3-pronged approach to describing the types, because I think that even in just the words on their own, you get a really powerful picture just to go through. Because it was actually, we were talking over lunch, and the type 1, when you just said what each one was in this order, it was really oh, that's very, it's very enlightening. So for type 8, we have body, assertive, emotional realness. For the 9, we have body, withdrawn, positive outlook. And then for type 1, which I feel like is just so potent, is body, compliance, competency. And it's just you feel the energies of each one of those combinations so strongly that I feel like this is just a really effective way to talk about the types. And I think for type 1 especially, there's a lot here.
Yeah, you get an instant picture.
Yeah.
I think when you've been doing Enneagram for a while, it's not universal, but there's a way that types tend to be in their body.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
So you can kind of walk into an Enneagram meetup and be like, probably a 1, you know, and it's because when you think body, competence and compliance, there's an uprightness.
Yeah. It's very
in the way that ones present. It's not universal, but it's interesting because they're in their body, but they're being very careful. They want to be competent. They want to comply to their internal metric, and they want to be good and right.
Yeah.
And so when you put all those things together, there's a tension that's good and bad. Either good or bad in the moment. But there's a tension in their body that most of the other types don't carry. Yeah. But those 3 things together hold everything kind of in place. Everything's kind of held.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing is there is a lot of tension with type 1. I think that's a strong word. So we'll dive into the body triad as the dominant center. And so what the big
thing
the big thing that we talked about in both 8 and 9 is anger, and how that's the dominant emotion of the body triad. It's kind of I call it the emotional filter. It's what all emotions are kind of filtered through.
Right.
But for type 1, anger is not appropriate. And so therefore
they're experiencing anger, and they're angry that they are experiencing anger.
Exactly. And so it's this real fireball sort of situation. Yeah. But they're really, to not get ahead of ourselves, but they really are moving into this compliance where they are trying to take their anger and make it something that is appropriate, right? So you rarely hear, oh, I'm really angry from type 1. You hear, I'm frustrated, or I'm irritated, or I'm disappointed, right?
If they're getting real, then they might feel resentful.
Yeah.
But that one's hard, but they can acknowledge it when they're doing their work.
It's more accessible than I'm angry. So ones really, they push that down in order to replace it with a more appropriate response.
Sure.
We're getting a little bit into the defense mechanism, reaction formation.
Yeah.
But ones really do live in their bodies
quite
fully, but they're highly controlling of their own experience within their bodies.
Yeah, they've got that gut center.
Yeah.
You know, that idea of like whether things are okay, how they feel about something, it happens first in their body. But the way that it gets channeled is different than the 8 or the 9. So the 9, when they feel it, they might try to talk themselves out of it. They might withdraw
away
and pull
from
away
it.
from it. The 8 moves right into it.
Yeah, it's like it's not even a this then that. It is just it's all there. Where 1s are feeling it. And it's like they're molding it and they're forcing it to be something right or good.
So what, like if something doesn't feel right in their body, how do they get back to how are they making sure they're doing the right thing so that if nothing else, they can be right and good?
Yeah. You know, this is something that we didn't talk about in the other 2 around 8 and 9 in the body triad, is that the body triad is their main, to use the language from Thomas Keating, their main program for happiness is through power and control. And all body types have a real issue with control. But we see it play out maybe in the most problematic ways, or the most obviously problematic ways with type 1. Because their control of other people's experiences, of their own experiences, is
of other
very,
people's behavior and
other
choices.
people's behavior choices, right, is very, very apparent. And we talk a lot about with type 1, the inner critic and how strong that is, and then how quickly that comes out sideways and affects other people.
Right. And really, it often is not they don't mean it to be harmful in the way that people sometimes experience it as harmful.
Yeah.
Because when they experience in their body that a situation is not good, what they do is they criticize themselves into submission to whatever the metric is for the 1. And so the 1, we're kind of jumping, but the compliant type. Yeah. But so they're complying, but they're complying primarily to whatever their picture of what is good is.
Yeah.
And so if you want something from them that doesn't match their picture of good, then they're hard to move. So then people think, well, they're not compliant, they're super stubborn, but they're compliant, but their compliance is to the ideal.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they're trying to, something's not right, I have to fix it by being kind of perfect or good. And so if something's not right for you, how am I going to help you? I'm going to help you know what's not good and what needs to be fixed and what needs to be tweaked. And it's out of that desire for everybody to be good and okay that they're trying to do that, but it can come across to the rest of us as like nitpicking and micromanaging and being highly critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, to highlight the body stance again, it is this very deep,
visceral,
very visceral experience for 1s. And truly, we talked a little bit about anger. 1s really like to keep that under wraps, but it can come out in a very, often if anger is coming out from a 1 who hasn't done their work, it expresses like vitriol, and it is toxic. It's been in there so long that it's like chemically reacted and is now like, spewing out, which can definitely happen with 1s. And so it's important for 1s to learn how to be in a better relationship with their anger. So it can be expressed in a safer way, safe for them and for their relationships.
Because when it comes out with all that vitriol and it's been stored up.
Yeah.
What can happen is you can be in a relationship, you get into conflict and you get the full lowdown on everything you've ever done wrong. Yeah. And it feels like all of a sudden this person that you love maybe hates you. Yeah. Because they have this strong picture of everything that's wrong. And you didn't even know they thought most of those things until you really get into that explosive anger. And then it's hard to walk those things back. And it's important to know on some level with 1s, they know everything that's wrong with everyone. Yeah. And they love you anyway. They're actually, they are helping, when they're in those moments. Yeah. But what it can feel like when you're receiving it could be like, you don't even like me. Yeah. Why are we even friends? And so it can be really damaging if we don't do some work around that.
Yeah. Like how that anger comes out. We've already touched a little bit on the compliant stance. So the compliant stance relates to having thinking as the repressed center.
Yep.
And what that looks like, right? So like people get real upset about this one. Just because you are thinking repressed does not mean you're stupid.
You don't have any thoughts.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you don't have thoughts, right? What it means is that the center that is repressed is not productive. It's not working appropriately, right? So instead of thinking critically about their actions and about their, they are being critical, but they aren't thinking critically about the world around them, about what they're feeling, about what they're experiencing. They rely on an outside metric or an outside scaffolding to kind of do their thinking for them.
Right.
Now, for the other types in the compliance stance, it's often certain people or certain relationships that step in. But ones don't actually do that with a relationship. They often do that with some sort of system. So whether it's a religious code or a moral code, there's something that can often be like written down and pointed to that a one is going to use as their thinking proxy, essentially.
Yeah, I always think about it as a rubric. Like a one always has a rubric. If you think back to school, you had to write a paper, your teacher would give you a rubric of this is what success looks like.
Yeah.
So whatever the case, it may be from a political party, it may be from a sports team. Like there's all these different ways that ones kind of lock into whatever their metric is, but it's kind of inherited and internalized.
Yeah.
And so if you really want to see a one in stress, like break down their rubric in some way, and it can be really, really stressful when something that they thought was right
becomes
suddenly
wrong.
Isn't right. And their thinking, their critical thinking has evolved them into a different rubric. It's a very stressful time.
Yeah.
But once they know what it is, you can kind of stop thinking. So if you think about like legalism in any space, you don't have to do the thinking. You just have a checklist. The thoughts
have already been
right. And so that's what it means to be thinking repressed, because you don't need your thinking if it's already decided.
Yeah. And I think that that's really how that plays out for ones, is that like they're not doing their thinking because it's already decided. And if something is already decided, it leads us into, it can lead us into a lot of disconnection with other people. It can lead us into a lot of conflict with other people, which leads us to the conflict resolution style of the one, which is competency, which you can see how closely, like it, for all of these types, trying to separate these three things out, I think gets challenging because they really do feed into one another. But we see how if the rubric is how they are kind of outsourcing their thinking and things have already been decided, then when there is a conflict, there is always a clear way out of it because things have already been set.
Right. I was just doing what I was supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And I need to get an A in that, whether or not it's helpful for you.
Yeah.
Because I need to be competent in following through with what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. And so for type ones and all the types in the competency triad, which includes 3 and 5, a conflict is considered over when you have the solution.
Right.
And it's really, I think that talking about conflict resolution styles, I'm glad that we went in the order that we did, because we've gone in order of least socially acceptable to most socially acceptable. At least in the United States, in our culture, conflicts are over when you've fixed the problem. Right? When you have the answer, when there is a solution. 1s, 3s, and 5s really heavily rely on this. And I'm not here to tell you that's not necessarily the case, but what I am here to tell you is that's not a complete way of looking at any conflict. So 1s, we talked about how 8s can move into repair very easily, and 1s look like they're very quick to move into repair because they immediately want to find the problem and then give you the solution.
But it's a systematic repair. It's not an emotional repair.
Yeah, it's not a connective or relational repair. And that's why the conflict continues to come up. Right? So anytime that we're not addressing a conflict from all 3 of these conflict resolution styles, it will crop back up. Right. Like always. It has to.
Well, and there are conflicts that there is not a solution for.
Yeah.
And so those are especially hard for people who are in the competency triad.
Yeah.
Because you have to just acknowledge and repair certain things. You can't go back and solve them. You can create a system to not do it in the future. And that's really useful to have a competency in play.
And I think that that's really where a lot of, I think a lot of people in the competency triad aren't necessarily trying to always fix what's happened from the past, but like, I think most 1s, 3s, and 5s, they can acknowledge that, like, oh, we can't fix the past, but it won't happen again, and here's how.
Yeah, I have a plan for this.
And so the assumption for 1s is that because I have a plan for how this is never going to happen again, we can act like it never happened at all. And that's really how 1s are coming about it, because they, their feeling center isn't, it's only in service of their action and their doing. It's not really available to be as connective. And so to admit, to admit that they've done something wrong is often a bridge too far for 1s, unless they've done a lot of work. And so they come in with their competency approach and say, well, because I know how to never do this again, everyone has to get on board and pretend like it never happened at all.
Right.
And that is where they continue to kind of degrade relationships, right? Where, the how to make sure it doesn't happen again is super important. But without this like connection to the emotional realness and to the meaning making of the positive outlook, it really falls flat and leaves a lot of people feeling really disconnected and hurt.
Yeah. And I think often you run into a situation where you are bringing a logistical or a circumstantial thing to the 1, and they're answering it from an identity place. Because their identity is so wrapped up in being right and good and doing the right thing to be in that competency space, that to acknowledge that they were wrong is an identity thing more than for a lot of the other types. And the truth is we all get things wrong, 1s included, and you can still be good and acknowledge what you've gotten wrong. But that's a much harder work, I think, for 1s.
Yeah, and
because
I would
then their anger gets pointed back at them.
Yeah.
So hardcore.
Yeah, I think I would even go as far as to like give this like piece to the 1s to say that like you don't have to be right, or you don't even have to be good to be loved.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Right. That like, because when issues are presented to 1s, a lot of times it is just like flat out, that's not, like I'm justified in my behavior because this X, Y, and Z. And the truth is it is coming from this identity place, right? And that's why their defenses go up. And, I hear a lot of people talk, we're just going to get right into the advice for type 1s. I hear a lot of people talk about how, you don't have to be like, don't be so hard on 1s because they're so much harder on themselves. I think that's bullshit. I think in order.
A little 8 moment.
Yeah, right. We're going to have a little 8 moment.
For the 1s.
Meet. But truly, I think 1s are not going to be able to grow until they truly hear what they've done wrong and how they've wronged and harmed other people and even people that they care about. And truly it's on them to let that in, right? That like, you're not going to grow until you can really own up to your mistakes. And, we all have this same kind of like pinnacle of our work that's like everything kind of hinges on this. And that's really what it is for 1s. And so, I think a way that if you're in relationship with a 1, a way that you can show them a lot of love is to like tell them how they fucked up and then be with them that.
All the 1s are dying inside.
Well, I
hear what you're saying.
Them in that is where you can find that really transformative and like corrective experience.
Especially if you're pairing it with love and acceptance.
Yes.
Because I think the lie that 1s believe is they have to be perfect in order to be loved and accepted. when in reality, most people find it hard to connect with perfect people. So if you are coming across as you never make mistakes and you're going to be very critical of everyone else's mistakes, it's actually a turnoff for connection. Whereas a lot of people actually connect over a shared mistake or grace in a mistake. And so getting vulnerable and honest often is what is needed to have those true connections. And true connections can withstand, human moments where ones are legitimately afraid that when their humanity shows, they will lose their place, you know?
Yeah.
So if you're pairing that truth telling with some positivity, with some kindness and some grace and love, then you can create a soft space for them to breathe a little bit, even in the midst of an error of judgment.
Yeah, this really highlights for me that none of our work is ever done in a vacuum. And I think that ones would gladly take that approach. And a lot of the ones that I've worked with have taken that approach. I mean, to the point of there's always this point in a therapeutic relationship where I have more space to push on certain things.
Right. Yeah.
And ones rarely move past that point. It's almost when we get to a place where it's I'm going to, and I'm also very explicit. Hey, I'm going to push on this thing and I'm going to, I know where I'm at. I know what I'm doing and we're going to push here. And I want you to really consider this. It's they don't come back after that. Which is, it's hard, right? People get to that hard spot and then ones would choose to do their self-improvement work in a vacuum, right? Because ones are very keen on self-improvement, but self-improvement never happens in a vacuum. It always happens in relationship. And
I have your messy stuff behind closed doors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think all body types truly do struggle with this idea of being in relationship, right? Because they're in the body. That is the source of all boundaries and all
their desires for power and control.
Yeah, and the power and control. Yeah. Exactly. All of this stuff. It's that leads to a lot of relationship issues.
As do all of the.
Yeah, and we all have that. But I think
a particular kind of relationship issues.
Yeah. A particular kind of relationship issues and a particular often willingness to go it alone. Which is not always super helpful. It can be a gift occasionally, but we find, especially with ones, that your work is only really going to happen in relationship.
Yeah. I think you can't be held accountable to what is not perfect on your own.
Yeah.
That much, because you
really can't. Yeah. Because you can safeguard against all of that. And that's really, the kicker for ones. And ones do a really good job of keeping people at a distance, which I think is, it's sad, really, because ones really do have a lot to offer people. And I do know a few ones who've done a lot of work. Who are in really, enriching and loving relationships and have a strong community. And it's really beautiful to watch because the way ones show up in those spaces when they've done that work, ones really are they are incredible at living out what they believe.
Yeah. And
maybe more than any other type.
They call their whole community to a stronger intentionality, to a stronger set of values. And so when there are ones in the mix, it keeps you on your course a little bit. Yeah. In a way that when there's not ones in the mix, you notice it. If you've been in this world for
things
very
are
long,
a little more loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
But it's true, right? Because there's this space that they really do. Even I think it's important to note that this is often the case, and it's most powerfully the case when ones are not talking about it, right? If ones are saying, "Oh, we need to stay on course, we need to do this, we need to do that," there's a lot of room for the criticalness, the harshness, the things that turn off people from a relationship. There's a lot of room for that to come in. where one's just showing up and being who they are without even saying anything, provide that kind of like inspiration to this higher standard, right? Like just being in relationship with them and being around them provides this without the one having to say anything about it.
Yeah. And I think ones who've done work and who exist in community well, they're saying what we need to do versus like, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
There comes in like a more mature energy of, let's make sure we're living by our value here. Like, I think our value is this, and I think that means that we should do this.
Yeah.
And it's a we that's
not
gentle
you.
versus a like, absolutely not, you're wrong, you're doing this. Why don't you care about our values, you know?
Yeah. Another thing that comes up with body types that we didn't talk about in 8 and in 9, because we were talking about other things, is that one of the key points for the body types is to learn the appropriate amount of energy for any given activity, right? And we see this as a big problem with 8s. We see it with almost the reverse problem with 9s. And it still shows up in 1s. It's like they're doing the right thing, but they're doing it like the outcome is often correct, but the amount of force and energy they're putting upon themselves in order to make that correct action is compulsive way tension. Like compulsive tension, like where an 8's going to bowl a bunch of people over, a 9's going to barely exist. 1s are like they're hitting the mark on the outside, but like they're crushing themselves underneath the pressure to do that. And so learning how to find more fluidity and learning how to Dr. David Daniels uses the words to use the appropriate amount of force for every action.
Sure.
That's really what all body types are working with, and
when they do that, they can access their joy.
Yeah.
You know, which they're kind of cut off from when they're really rigidly tight.
Yeah. And I mean, I think 7s give us the best example. Like 1s can
ones
take
move
a load
towards
off.
7s.
Yeah, like what can you do? You know, if you're a 1 and you're watching this, like what can you do to let loose a little bit? Have a little bit of fun. Let fun guide you a little.
Yeah. Do it.
Not just what's
I vote yes.
Right. Yeah. Of course you vote yes. But I also vote yes. So there you go. It's 2 against 1. You have to do what we say.
You have to do it. New rubric.
New rubric. Here it is. I think we've done a good job of kind of wrapping up, you know, some really wonderful things about 1s, some challenging things about 1s. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. If you found anything in this video helpful, be sure to click the like button and subscribe if you want more Conscious Enneagram content.
Yes.
Drop a comment below and tell us what your experience of 1s has been. If you are a 1, how did we do? What do you resonate with? I'm sure you're going to tell us a whole lot.
It's okay. We can take it.
We can take it. Thank you so much for watching, and you can find out all my stuff on consciousenneagram.com, and you can find Kim and her work at
KimberlyandCoach.com.
Sweet. All the links are in the description below, and we'll see y'all in the next one.
Cheers.